As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
That is part of King Charles's speech to the throne, or speech today, the throne speech he delivered, and towards the end, and actually that applause went on for quite some time after he referenced the true North strong and free from our anthem. So the take, I think, again, from most people I've seen since that time is actually pretty positive. Let's get a bit of a perspective here from Dr. Justin Voke. He is a royal historian at McMaster University. Dr. Voke, appreciate the time. Thanks so much. Let me begin by asking you what you thought of what you heard today.
I was really impressed. I thought that the speech hit all the right notes. It did everything it needed to, and I think it is going to be remembered as one of the most important speeches that Charles has ever made in Canada.
Wow, that's saying something, considering, of course, he's now, his 20th time to Canada. Why this one perhaps sticking up perhaps more than any other? And I realize there's not been a monarch here since his mother back in 1977, but why this?
So, I mean, we can't talk about this without acknowledging the Donald Trump in the room. It's highly unlikely the king would have been invited over for the throne speech had there not been this crossroads that Canada is at with the United States, which we've never really experienced before. But the speech really managed to touch on so many important aspects of what it means to be Canadian. It acknowledged Indigenous reconciliation, a topic that we really wouldn't have ever heard from his mother. It talked about the unique distinction and the pride of place that Quebec has as being a nation within a nation. Talks about our diversity, and of course, that line about the true North really being strong and free. That thing's going to be a soundbite for the king, I think, for years to come.
By the way, for people, and I know we mentioned this on our news, we should explain that the speech from the throne is basically the government's speech, drafted, if you will, by the government. How much of that, from what you heard today, was King Charles adding his own touch to it, if I could say it that way?
So he is allowed to provide some personal introductory remarks at the beginning, which he did. Those were when he talked about Canada's military history, and he made that comment about every time he comes to Canada, a bit more of it gets into his bloodstream and gets into his heart. But you're absolutely right. It is largely drafted by our government. It's important for people to keep in mind, though, that it still has to get the king's approval. He still has to come back to the Carney government and say, yes, I'm comfortable saying everything you've put in here. So even though it is the government speech, the fact that the king is comfortable and gives the thumbs up to everything he said does add a degree of legitimacy or weight behind those words.
You know, I wonder if you kind of, for context, I heard someone discussing this yesterday, and of course it goes back now almost 50 years, but when the Queen was here in 1977 giving the throne speech, we had just come in Quebec, of course, out of a separatist government being elected for the first time. Pierre Trudeau was then prime minister. And the thinking was, by having the Queen here, that was making a statement, of course, about Canadian unity. And you're almost drawing a parallel here between this time, King Charles, and the situation with Donald Trump in the United States. Is that fair?
I don't know if I'd say that. It was a very different time in 1977. The Queen's visit was also part of a much larger Commonwealth tour she was doing to celebrate her 25 years on the throne. And a lot of the pomp and the pageantry was about Canada's place in the monarchy. What we have experienced in the last 24 hours with this visit is the reverse. For the first time, it's been about the monarchy's place in Canada. It's about how does the constitutional monarch serve the Canadian people instead of just being subjects of the crown.
That's an interesting take. You're right. It is different from what it was 50 years ago. I wonder, how do you react, though? Because I know there was an Angus Reid poll just, I think the other day, because we knew this was coming, of course. And it seems that 83, I think the number was 83% of Canadians don't have an issue. They're not all that excited one way or the other about the king. But there are still people out there, and I'm sure you hear this, and if obviously in Quebec, we hear it more than pretty much any other place, who still do not like the idea of the monarchy, but that doesn't seem to be bothered, or the king doesn't seem to be bothered by that, didn't address that, doesn't talk about it. Does that ever come up?
Absolutely. And it is nothing new. As a historian, I've looked at records in London going back to 1714 that talk about concerns and criticisms of the monarchy at the time of coronations and funerals. I think the best example, though, of how this fits in is what we saw at Lansdowne Park yesterday, where there was overwhelming public support for the king and queen cheering them on, but there were also protesters there who were chanting, "Not our king."
Right.
But what I think is so significant about that for Canada in this moment is it was peaceful. There was no hostility or tension between the protesters and the monarchists or just the people who came out to see the spectacle. That is what Canada is, to have these two completely incompatible positions occupying the same space and still being civil about it.
I will ask you just one final question. We started by you saying you think this is a memorable moment and will be remembered for a long time. We can say, did you find anything in here not positive from what King Charles had said today?
Honestly, I went over it with a fine-tooth comb, and Parliament really did a bang-up job with making sure that there was very little for critics to hang their hats on. The only thing that might, and it's a big might, get a bit of rumblings from Washington is the declaration of Canada wanting to be a world leader with its allies against the exact wording is slipping my mind at the moment, my apologies, but it was subtle hints basically about American isolationism,
right,
and protectionism, and Canadian support of our allies.
And we leave it at that. Dr. Voke, I thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.